Okay, so good day everyone. For today's video, we are going to discuss um, converse, inverse, and contrapositive. So these statements are derived from a certain conditional statement or implication. Okay, so before everything else, let us first review what a conditional statement is, or also known as implication. Okay, suppose we have statements P and Q. We can express it into its conditional form using an if-then clause. So if P, then Q. Or you can also express it using this symbolic notation. Okay, so in this form, conditional form, the P is the hypothesis or the antecedent. And the Q, on the other hand, is the conclusion or the consequent. Okay. Now, from this original conditional statement, there are other implications that we can derive. Okay. Let us start with the inverse, or the converse, I mean. So, suppose we have original statement P implies Q, we can write the converse statement by simply interchanging P and Q. Okay, so we have this notation or expression Q implies P. So as you can see, the original statement is P implies Q. Its converse is just the interchange na rules of P and Q. So in the original statement, the P is the hypothesis and Q is the conclusion. But for the converse, Q is the hypothesis and P is the conclusion. All right. So you can express this in an if-then clause. If Q, then P. So as you can see, again, the converse is just the interchange na roles of P and Q of a certain conditional statement or implication. Okay, so what about the inverse? The inverse of a conditional statement, on the other hand, is the negated na values of the statements in your original conditional statement. So we have here, suppose we have the P implies Q, its inverse is the negated na P. So we have the not P implies negated value of Q, not Q. Okay, so expressed in its if using an if-then clause, it is read as if not P, then not Q. Okay, and the third one is the contrapositive. Suppose we have this original statement again, P implies Q. So we compose the contrapositive by interchanging the hypothesis and conclusion of the inverse of the conditional statement. So in other words, in order to find the contrapositive, we must first find the inverse. So what is the inverse of P implies Q? So it is not P implies not Q. Okay, and after that, we swap the roles of the conditional of the inverse. Okay, so we have after taking the inverse not P implies not Q, we swap the roles of not P and not Q. So we have the contrapositive not Q implies not P. Okay, so we are using the converse and inverse in order to get the contrapositive. So it is also read as if not Q, then not P. Okay, so let us have some examples. But before that, let me ask you first why these are helpful. Okay, so if we know that a certain statement is true or false, then we can assume that another is also true or false. Okay, so the statements that are related in this way are considered as logically equivalent. All right, so first, let us have some examples. So you are tasked to write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the statement. Statement P, you meet the month and deadline, and Q, you get a bonus. So if expressed in a conditional form, P implies Q, then if you get a month and deadline, if you meet the month and deadline, then you get a bonus, okay? So we can express it using this notation. So now, let us first get its inverse. So again, the inverse is just the swapped roles of P and Q. So now the Q is the hypothesis or the antecedent, and P is now the conclusion, okay? So we simply swap. So the expressed in its English form. So if you get a bonus, so that is the Q, and then you have met the month and deadline. Okay. Now for the inverse. The inverse again is just the negation of P and Q. So we have the not P implies not Q. So if you don't meet the month and the deadline, meaning if you don't meet the month and deadline, then you don't get a bonus. Okay, so we just negate the P and the Q. What about the contrapositive? So the contrapositive again is taken from first getting the inverse of P and Q, which is not P implies not Q, and swapping the roles of not P and not Q. So the contrapositive is not Q and implies not P. Okay, so the not Q is equivalent to you don't get a bonus. So if you don't get a bonus, then the not P is equivalent to you don't meet the month and deadline. So if you do not get a bonus, then you will not have met the deadline. Okay, so let's have another example. Write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the following statements. If today is Saturday, then I will go for a 10-kilometer run. So let P and Q be the following statements. P, today is Saturday, and Q, I will go for a 10-kilometer run. So this statement, if today is Saturday, then I will go for a 10-kilometer run, is an implication and may be written using the symbolic notation. P implies Q. So now, what is the inverse? Again, the inverse is just a swap na P implies Q. So we have Q implies P. So if I go for a 10-kilometer run, so that is now your hypothesis or your antecedent, then today is Saturday. Okay, so that is your P. P now becomes your conclusion. And what is the inverse? The inverse is just the negated values of the P and the Q. So we have not P implying not Q. So let us negate P. If today is not Saturday, then I will not go for a 10-kilometer run. Okay. Next, the contrapositive. Again, how do you get the contrapositive? The contrapositive is just taken from when you take the inverse of the original conditional P implies Q, which will be not P implies not Q, and you swap it. So it will be not Q implies not P. So the not Q will be the not Q or the negation of Q is if I do not go for a 10-kilometer run. Then not P is today is not Saturday. So if expressing it in its implication form, so if I do not go for a 10-kilometer run, then today is not a Saturday. Okay.